Welcome to A State of Mind. I am so happy to be bringing you a new episode of this podcast because I know the power of conversations to change lives. You can learn more about each episode in the show notes below, and you can support our podcast by checking out our sponsors with the links below. It would also help us out a lot if you left us a review or gave us a comment or just shared about this with your friends and family. So I'm here today with Brit Lange. Brit, thank you for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And how would you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, man. Loaded question. Yeah, I definitely have a lot of eclectic elements to my life in this season. But yeah, I would say the main way that I would love to share with your community what I'm really focused on right now is, twofold. I have a pretty steep foot in the psychedelic space. I've worked for a handful of companies, psychedelic startups, in the past 5 years to support them in getting their mission forward. So it's definitely been a big piece of the puzzle. And I have a handful of clients right now that are psychedelic startups that I'm freelancing for, specifically from a community direction standpoint. So community is really a big focus of mine in this season, professionally and personally. So community building, community direction, just teaching people about the power of community. That's a big topic of mine, not just from a business standpoint or an entrepreneurial standpoint, but I really do believe that we as individuals can make a huge impact in the current state of our world by joining forces, finding each other, building whatever wants to be co-created amongst our individual little pods, and just really putting an effort towards our people and coming through with just a heart-centered mission, again, professionally or personally. That's a really big focal point of mine right now. But I'm also a single mom of two teenage boys. They're 13 and 16, so that's also a huge just day-to-day experience in my world is, figuring out how to raise young men in 2026 is a very unique conversation too. And yeah, just I'm on this entrepreneurial journey. I've been off and on it for about 12 years now. And right now I'm doubling down on visibility and community and really building a personal brand in all of these unique sectors of the world. So yeah, very high level. That's where I'm at right now and what I'm super interested in.
Beautiful. Yeah, definitely a challenge raising boys, raising any children today. I think we look at social media, which is something we've talked about in this podcast a good bit. The technology and that interface has changed how our minds are developing, actually, especially when we look at the developing brain and the impact that's having and the addictive qualities. And unfortunately, the short-term video format, which I myself create, I try to do it with good intentions, with good information, but it's not good neurologically because it's training our
100%.
attention to be so short.
Oh yeah, and I definitely feel that with them. They're very squirrely.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is we're resilient and people
Yep,
will adapt. Yeah. Well, good.
exactly.
Well, I'm curious. Do you want to share a little bit, like you personally, what's drawn you into working in the psychedelic space?
Yeah. At first it was just, to be completely honest, it was 100% ego. I was like, "Oh, that's cool." Like that's really cool. At the time I was working in insurance, so I was like, "What? Psychedelics?" I had just learned that ketamine was legal and that you could go that route and that there even was a psychedelic industry. Um, so yeah, this was in my mid to late 20s, and I was just like, I'm super interested and kind of set my sights on going to that space and just immersing myself in it. I was really drawn to it. It was ego, but it was also, I think, really intuition too, where I felt there was something there. And at the time when I first got my first role in an online ketamine clinic, I had no experience with ketamine. I had had a few, recreational trips, but nothing super substantial that I was like, oh my God, psychedelics, this is a game changer. I was just like, whatever. Um,
Hmm.
different medicines in different settings, mushrooms outside is interesting, that sort of thing. But then as luck or destiny would have it, I actually got laid off from that ketamine company within a few months of joining them. And 1 month after buying my first house as a single mom. So I just went into this like very severe, the most severe depression I've ever experienced. And I had already happened to be, taking advantage of my employee perk, which was getting 6 ketamine sessions as part of just being an employee there. And like just as luck would have it, I went into the deepest, darkest depression I've ever experienced, and then just got immediately zooted out of it from this incredible medicine. And I was like, wow, that's really profound to have been. At the time I was a clinical recruiter and we were hiring our prescribers, so I was very versed in the efficacy rate of ketamine is over 80% of clinical improvement, and I was
Hmm.
saying it and saying it and saying it, scripted every day. And then I had the lived experience of it, having depression for the
Hmm.
first time, and then also being just immediately removed from it. And that really changed the game for me, where I was like, oh, I really understand the power of psychedelics. And
Hmm.
from there, I stayed in the mental health space and stayed in the psychedelic space, coming in and out depending on where I was at with my just desire to work for a living at the time. Especially, I struggle with being an employee. I definitely prefer entrepreneurship over employment, but I kept kind of negotiating with myself, and I just every time I thought about getting a full-time job or having freelance clients, the number one non-negotiable was I absolutely must be in first the mental health space, and then later on it was the psychedelic space or bust, because I had such a reverence for the work that was being done.
Hmm.
And yeah, luckily, in my last full-time role, I was in mental health, but not psychedelics. And I just was looking for any off ramp to get out of corporate, because that was the worst year of my life.
Yeah.
No, it was okay.
Yes.
It wasn't terrible, but it was pretty rough. I just was like, I don't belong here. And by the time I got out, I had found a freelance position in psychedelics, and I just took it immediately, and was a huge pay cut and a pretty big gamble with my finances. But I was just like, there's something here. Like I'm really meant to be in the industry. I'm really meant to be connected to the medicine in some way. And I have such a breadth of business knowledge and skill sets. Like I want to contribute it to the psychedelic space. So I've been on that journey for, yeah, I think maybe just over 5 years at this point, or just under 5 years, and haven't looked back. It's just the more I immerse myself in the space, the richer it gets, and the more I'm just such a big proponent for this work, and the people doing the work, especially on the front lines, I think is one of the most noble roles in today's society. So yeah, I love to support them however I can.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's clear you're mission driven. There's a purpose and there's a belief in what you're doing. I think that's true of a lot of people in this psychedelic space, and it is a risk and it is unknown and it's a little bit of a wild west for sure. And it's a revolution. It's a revolution in mental health treatment
Yeah,
for sure. It's changing a lot of people's lives and it's coming out of the closet more and more.
yeah. Yep. We're
Yeah.
lucky for that. We're lucky to be here now, where it's losing the stigma, it's losing the discretion. It's, yeah, really getting a lot of focus on it right now. Sometimes to a fault. Sometimes there's a lot of misunderstanding that comes with it as well. Depending on what angle you're interacting with psychedelics from, there's so many doors to this room, and some can actually be more harmful than they are helpful.
Yeah.
And I think discernment is really hard to understand. Like, okay, psychedelics, it's a huge headline. Where do I
Yeah.
go? It's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, thanks for speaking to that, and definitely share that that on this podcast. There's risks with anything. There are risks with psychedelics. There are It's not a magic bullet. And part of my work as a psychedelic therapist is managing people's expectations.
Yeah.
And that's something we could talk about more. But let me ask you this: so,
Yeah.
looking back at it from where you are now, losing that job, which was so difficult at the time, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is there gratitude there?
Such rich gratitude. It was such a catalytic moment of my life where, I would say it was the beginning of my journey finding God, where I was
Wow.
just
Well,
absolutely destroyed from a mental standpoint, financial standpoint, security standpoint, to go from just this like total darkness to recognizing like that was actually God. I was in I didn't love the job. It was a really toxic environment. It was a mental health company, but they wanted us working like weekends and crazy
wow.
KPIs. And it was a really
Yeah.
toxic place. And I knew I wasn't going to quit that job, but so did God. And instead of me just suffering through it for the foreseeable future to be able to pay my mortgage, the job was taken from me. And I spent 12 months not working. I had a little side business, a jewelry business, but I was able to really recognize the the way society is set up for burnout and adrenal fatigue and depression, anxiety. I was on this hamster wheel that I didn't even recognize because I do come from a long history of being an entrepreneur. And suddenly
Hmm.
I was just in this like golden handcuff situation that
Hmm.
I wouldn't have seen myself. And yeah, I really do believe God took me out of that, and it's completely changed the course of my whole life and the way I see self-care, and especially
Yeah.
self-care from others.
Yeah. Great. That's really great to share with people. So it sounds like, I mean, I've worked with a number of people, and when we're working together, at some point they have lost their job, been fired or laid off in some form. And obviously, that can be one of the most difficult, most stressful things that can happen, especially as an adult, especially as a parent. And so I remember like earlier on in my work as a therapist, like that happened to someone I'm working with. And actually, I'm kind of freaking out a bit too on the inside. I'm like, oh, I don't know if they're going to continue to be able to keep coming, or I'm worried about their family. I'm worried about them. But I can honestly say, looking back on it, and it sounds kind of odd to say, obviously sometimes losing your job is just bad, and there's not much good with it. But everyone that I've worked with who's lost their job, it's been really hard. But then eventually, they're actually grateful for it, and then they say things like what you just said. Well, I didn't really like the job anyway. I was wanting something new. And there's been multiple times where I'm working with someone and they're complaining about their job, session after session. And I'm kind of challenging them, like, what do you really want to be doing? What's your passion? What's your inspiration? Your life is short. And then they get laid off. And often, I mean, what you're describing is circumstantial depression. Something really difficult happens and you feel depressed. And it's different than kind of like long lasting kind of clinical depression where it's a response to the circumstances and there's an intelligence there and there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing really wrong with you ultimately if you have more clinical depression either, but it's a depression in response to the circumstances. And even though in the moment it often feels like the end of the world or feels like you're going to this feel bad for the rest of your life, it's not true. It's going to change with your circumstances more. And yeah,
100%. I didn't recognize the difference between, yeah, the circumstantial and the clinical depression. So that's super interesting for me to double click on later.
yeah,
But yeah, I would say with, oh, I lost my train of thought. Oh, as far as the concept of working with people that are in miserable jobs and then lo and behold they get laid off, it's gotten to the place for me if I'm working with a client one on one and they're also in that similar place of, I just want to quit this job. I hate it so much. Complain, complain. There was one moment with one of my clients, maybe like 2 years ago, where it was just so bad. And I knew she wasn't going to leave. And I said, energetically, one of my gifts is to be able to read the energy of a situation. And I told her, I was like, I would really prepare for losing this job because it's so bad. I really do see God or the universe or spirit kicking you out of the nest because you're not
Mm.
going to do it for yourself. It's likely going to happen soon because it's just that dire and you're being abused. Like this job is really abusive, and I don't think there is a God that's going to keep you in this situation longer than you need to be there. And this conversation happened on a Tuesday, and by Friday, she was let go of a job that she had been at for 2 years. And it's just, yeah, one of the things that I tell people that I work with and people of my community is what's meant for us doesn't miss us, and what misses us wasn't meant for us. There's just never
There
a
you go. Yeah.
situation where I think there's a mistake being made. Everything feels really purposeful in my world. And it continues to be true. The more I just move with a little bit of slowness and just a little bit of surrender.
Yeah. 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 It's really interesting in your story. You're working for a ketamine company. It's providing mental health services. And yet, as an employee, it wasn't a place where they're honoring the mental health and the maybe even the spiritual health and well-being of the employees. And I think that matters, and I think it's not to say that people didn't get benefit from treatments there, but it's I think there's a way in which organizations, it's the congruence. Can the inner reflect the outer, and can there be integrity throughout rather than presenting, having a good mission, but then on the back end, like kind of mistreating people or overworking or putting too much stress. And I think that's a big conversation. My hope is that the psychedelic space, as it emerges more and more, especially with something like psilocybin, will have more of that heart-centered quality and more of that spiritual connection for the people working there as well as the people come in. And of course, there's some wonderful ketamine clinics out there. I'm not saying they're not, but I will share with people. I've seen a number of ketamine clinics that do seem more about the money, and they're
Yeah.
set up in a way where you get in and out, and there's almost some of them have zero therapeutic support, and even the space they create. And we know from psychedelic therapy, set and setting, creating a conducive space for a therapeutic healing experience, a spiritual experience, is so important. It's sad to see people going to ketamine clinics where it's very kind of austere or clinical or what's the word, kind of institutional, and
Yeah.
just kind of cutting costs and so yeah, if you're just going into like a kind of like blank room with fluorescent lighting and a big TV screen on the wall, like I'm not a fan. I don't promote that. I don't think that's really offering the level of help that we could be offering people.
Yeah, those you're right on the money from a money perspective. And unfortunately, you'll see the big egos across the board with all of the medicines. But yeah, with the ketamine clinics that don't put any emphasis on set and setting, aesthetic, um, therapeutic guidance during the actual experience, and then no integration afterwards, you're really setting your clients and your patients up for coming back to you again in 6 months, which might be part of their business model, honestly. Because if you're not focusing on, especially the integration, I think is the biggest piece that's missing in a lot of these clinics. If you're not focused on helping people create long-term success with these, new neural pathways and new behaviors and new thought processes that they're coming up with in these journeys, then the efficacy rate of this medicine drastically decreases because it's not something that is going to stay long term because they're just relying on the power of the medicine and not on, yeah, the behavior and the changes that can happen afterwards.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I was just listening to Robin Carhart Harris, who's maybe the most famous scientist studying psychedelics, and he's there in University of California now. And he was sharing about studies he's done where they are taking out these different variables, for the sake of science. And one of the huge variables is music. And so doing studies with people taking psilocybin with and without that musical journey. And also with, say the same thing about therapy. These different components are so integral to good outcomes, to genuine healing and deepening in your spirituality and all the positive good things we want, that removing them, it's way less effective and perhaps even harmful. And so it's we're running into these issues with the government, with the FDA, where they're like, well, how do we approve, for example, MDMA or psilocybin? If for it to be effective, it needs all these other components, and we're the Food and Drug Administration, and we don't get to determine or approve one type of therapy versus another type, or we don't get to approve music versus no music. That's outside our wheelhouse, and it's doing that's a real disservice. And I think in the long run, we're going to figure it out as a society. But what you just said is absolutely true. We need all these elements working together. And psychedelics are kind of, they're blending these boundaries between they kind of have an anti, they don't like being so siloed off.
Yeah.
It's not a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of thing. It's not purely a neurological thing. It's all these things working together. And I think as the science deepens, we're going to understand more and more that this is all connected anyway.
Yeah.
We're not going to, if you put me in a depressing room under bright fluorescent lighting with a white wall and some guy in a lab coat staring at me for 6 hours, I'm not going to enjoy that. I'm not going to feel great after that.
Yeah, exactly. To your point, I mean, the way that I really look at psychedelics is, you can kind of interact with them through three, well, I guess four different lenses. It's, recreational, which is, its own separate box. And then from the more healing standpoint, it's clinical or therapeutic or what would I call it? Ceremonial, like just
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
focusing on it, more in a spiritual setting. And to your point, it's so hard to study and say what's impactful and what's not, because I really think it's dependent on the individual that is setting the container, the space holder, the facilitator, the guide, the clinician, because their relationship with the medicine and their relationship with the other elements that they're bringing in is part of the weaving of the entire experience. So one playlist for one person in one setting might show up completely differently if that playlist is played with a different medicine or in a different setting or with different kinds of people around. The people that
Mhm.
are you're doing group ceremonies, that's a completely, additional element to really take into consideration as far as what your experience is going to be like. If you are in a group of 10 people and you're, having a great trip, but then the person
Mm.
next to you is having a terrifying experience, it is going to deeply impact your experience.
Yes,
And
that's an important
that's why
point.
we
Yeah.
yeah, that's why we really rely on the facilitators to be professionals, have experience under their belt, and really have a deep relationship and trust with the medicine. And, I've talked to probably hundreds of facilitators at this point, and I really believe those that are doing the highest work and in the best relationship, which is hard to qualify, but in the best work are those that can be as hands off as possible and really allow the medicine to do its role in the space within, limitations, obviously, and boundaries. But yeah, those that really allow the medicine to just infiltrate the
Mhm.
experience in the room, it's that's really when I see magic happening the most.
Yeah, totally. Good. And then we connected through this amazing company called Mycelium. And there's going to be a link down below for people to check out Mycelium. Do you want to share about that a little bit? What they're up to and your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. So last December, someone on LinkedIn reached out to me and asked if I wanted a sample box of microdoses. And I was like the magic kind? And they were like, yeah, we were just reaching out to people in the space and building community and letting them know about what we're up to and would love to send you a sample box of our incredible products and see what you think. And I was like, one, yes. Two, do you need help building communities? That's something that I'm really focused on right now. At the time, my one freelance client was community direction for expansion company, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But they wound up meeting with me, and I joined the team pretty quickly. And it was just a really synchronistic experience of coming in and just seeing the way that this company is doing business. And it's, a microdosing company in 2026. So it's gray area, at best. It's definitely not totally on the up and up. And, the nervous system regulation that you need as a human being to run a company like that is, it's a tall order. And their ethos and their heart and their commitment to this work has really honestly shifted the way that I do business in all facets of my life. they come with this rich spirit of generosity where it's we give as much as we possibly can. We give sample boxes, whenever it's requested. We have really generous affiliate programs. We send product for free to our affiliates when they're just like, "Oh, I'm out of the focus blend. Can I have another re-up?" We're so generous with our resources, and I really appreciate that because I've been in business and in companies where it's just so bottom line focused, where you are just a cog in the machine. You're not even a real person. You're just, a number on a
Hmm.
spreadsheet. And they treat every single team member, every single affiliate customer, like they are just so adamant about being a resource for people with this medicine. And part of my role as their community director is my calendar is open and people within our community have access to it and they can schedule calls with me to chat about protocol, dosage, to chat about even just if they're facilitators. And like I coach facilitators, like what can I help you with? I'll help you build your practice. It's just this total open invite of, receive energy. We're all in this mycelium network together. What do you need? What can we give? How can we support? And the medicine that they have is so reflective of that energy. They invest deeply in their cultivator. It's someone up in Maine who is committed to being in right relationship with the plant. So, only being in a meditative state, really intentional about the music that they're listening to when interacting with the plant.
Mm.
And you can just feel that when you receive the product. The packaging is gorgeous. I actually have.
Yeah. Yeah, the packaging is great. I can feel what you're speaking to. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
So they have just, yeah, some of the best products. This is our coconut creamer. Our cacao is amazing and for
Mm.
me, incredibly potent. And I don't recommend taking before going to work. And then they have some amazing blends, capsules. So calm for obvious purposes. Love is actually a libido booster, but I really enjoy using it before yoga, for like my embodiment practices or before going into nature and hiking for a few hours. It's a really profound stack. And then Focus is our bestseller, and that is what so many neurospicy folks are coming to. It's like by far our most popular product because it really does help with focus. It really does help, especially for those of us with ADHD or other neurospicy disorders. It really just helps us narrow in and commit to a task and see it to completion. I've started taking it mostly daily, within my own protocol. And I just open the capsules and put it in my morning coffee, and it's better than any Adderall or prescription that I've ever been given. So I highly recommend our Focus Blend for, yeah, people on the ADHD spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't want this to sound, too much like an infomercial or something, but I can share that my Mycelium's products, it's the highest quality microdosing products I've had. I can just say that. And so I can feel it. The blending with other herbs and adaptogenic mushrooms and other medicinal properties is great. One interesting thing I can share too is because I've studied traditional, medicines like Ayurvedic and Tibetan medicine and a little bit with Chinese medicine too. A lot of traditional herbal medicines have aphrodisiac qualities because it's increasing blood flow and energy through the body. And so it
Mhm.
doesn't mean you have to, be going on a hot date or something. There's profound health benefits from those medicines. And so that love blend is really beautiful. I have a friend of the podcast, Duncan Horst, who's a professional poker player, and he swears by mycelium. So I thought I would just share that with us.
Oh,
And
I love that.
I
Awesome.
just
I'll have
mailed
to
him
get
some.
you
He won two poker tournaments this week, and I had sent him some of these products. So uh,
amazing. Yeah, I'll
and
have to be in contact. That's
yeah,
awesome.
he's an example of someone who wants a true microdose. And some of the microdose products out there are stronger than others, and good to err on the side of less because you can always take more, but you can't untake it once you've taken it. So there's
100%.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of my intention behind breaking the capsules into the coffee instead of taking the full capsule, because the mycelium blends in the capsules are 100 mgs of psilocybin, which is a decent dose for some people. For others, it's not enough, but yeah, for some it can be, especially for those that are sensitive, it can be a pretty intense dose, especially for the first go around. So having it or quartering it is definitely recommended in the beginning.
Yeah. And I think I'll just share a little bit here. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. How does this work? Let's do this. So I'm going to share, I just want to share some studies here. This is a really cool article looking at psychedelic use in the United States, just in total, but microdosing specifically just came out this year. Um, People are microdosing with psilocybin, MDMA, amanita muscaria, ketamine, LSD, but psilocybin is the most used psychedelic substance. 11 million adults in the United States using it in the last year, and then 10 million trying microdosing. So we can see that it's definitely growing. A lot of people are using it. Um, and then in researching the science around microdosing, this is one of the bigger studies done with psilocybin mushrooms. Double-blind, placebo-controlled study. The results are kind of mixed. Unfortunately, it's not showing a real clear. I don't know where the results are there at the bottom here, but it's not showing a real clear. Those who microdose versus those who took a placebo. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. And so I just wanted to speak to that. I think part of what's going on here is when we talk about our mental states and our mental well-being and our consciousness, it's notoriously difficult to study scientifically. And it's not easy for any new medication to beat the placebo. In fact, something like 50 or even 60% of new drugs on trial don't beat, quote unquote, beat the placebo. And so part of what we need to do is appreciate the power of the placebo. The power of the placebo is the power of our consciousness and our mind to shift our physiology, our nervous system, our mental states through our beliefs and our thoughts. And psychedelics amplify that ability, I believe. And so, the placebo effect is not some small thing that we need to dismiss. It's a beautiful part of our consciousness that we actually can harness for the good, something I like to share with people. And if microdosing helps you tap into that, combine that with the power of the belief, if it works for you, more power to you. I think of an example of a sports player who does a little lucky ritual before the big game. Maybe he wears I don't know, same pair of socks or something. And you could say that's superstition. That's just in his mind. If it gives him a mental advantage that shows up in the actual game, more power to him. Because at the end of the day, there's actual results there. And if I take something in the morning and feel better, and there's no negative effects, like more power to me. So I think there's that's happening. And then I think another big piece that the science studies are missing is what is your relationship with the medicine? Are you a member of the scientific study who just kind of thought it was cool and is signing up and whatever? Or are you someone who has profound experiences with, for example, psilocybin, that have profound spiritual experiences? You have a relationship with it. You're able to be there with the positive and learn from the more challenging and to be with it all and to work with yourself. And I think there's just this quality of relationship. And a lot of people I work with, it's like, it's something you could talk to, something you can connect, like you're talking to an intelligence, the way you might talk to God or spirit or your higher power. And I think that opens up more possibilities. And we're kind of outside the realm of scientific materialism at that point, but it doesn't mean it's not helping people. So I just wanted to speak, I think with microdosing in particular, there's a lot of factors that are gonna be hard to study scientifically.
100%. I think you're spot on there. And to your point, I love that that just proves how powerful our minds are because yeah, the placebo effect in and of itself, and your example of I think you said baseball player, home field advantage is a real thing
Yeah.
because the energy really makes a difference in how you show up and how you play or how you show up to your life. And yeah, microdosing, if it is just placebo, why not, right? It's certainly improving something in some way if you're having a lifted and elevated experience in your world or feeling, deeper into your body or, whatever that effect is. If it's helping, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting to talk this through and be
Mhm.
honest with the science and appreciate it. And I think it's going to take time to catch up. I think we need a lot more studies and there's so many factors, and but yeah, if it's helping, why not? And then it's just interesting, I'm just, one person over here, but when I take a microdose, I feel it. I'm very sensitive to the medicine. It could just be in my mind and something I'm imagining, but my subjective experience is like I 100% could tell you a day I microdose and a day I don't. I don't do it very often. It's, more of like a Saturday weekend thing for me because I will tend to feel it more.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of people I talk to are similar. And then, I could share this example. There's someone I've been working with. They've been suffering from depression, anxiety off and on their whole life. And they've gotten off psychiatric medications. They didn't want to go that route. So for the last several years, they haven't taken any psychiatric meds, and they just recently started microdosing. And so over the last few weeks of the microdosing, they have shown much more optimism, much more energy. They're feeling inspired again. They've been working on this business idea for years, and they've actually like moved forward with it. They're feeling more creative, um, and they're reporting less depression. I'm like, okay, this is working for this individual, and there's minimal negative. Almost, I can't think of. There's no negative side effects that they're noticing or that I'm aware of here, and so more power to them. And so that's just an example of one. It's a big difference between being a therapist like myself who works with people individually and in groups versus a researcher who's trying to do these studies. But my experience working with people, I've seen some really, really profound results, and I just want to share that for people listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those stories. I think hearing other people's success can be really expansive for others to know what's possible for them, especially those that, yeah, are able to get off of psychiatric medications for, a variety of reasons, especially, side effects not always essentially approving your current depression or experience. The side effects can oftentimes just really add on to the weight of what you're already going through. Yeah, I really have a deep respect for the need for research. I do really see how that moves the needle just in my own life when people
Yeah.
in my world are not super open to psychedelics despite how much I've, invited them to them. But when they see, the research and the numbers behind it, especially, the harm that alcohol does versus
Mm.
mushrooms and so on and so forth. Yeah, the numbers really do drive people to feel safer in some way to interact with the medicine, even, introductory. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Another role that microdosing can provide is with integration,
Yeah.
meaning like you've had a macrodose, a large experience with a psychedelic like psilocybin, and then microdosing afterwards, even if it's once a week or whatever works for you and your lifestyle, it's a way to reconnect with that big experience you had. It's a way to remember it and honor it and start to bring that more and more into your life and to connect with the spirit of that medicine. So I think that's another beautiful part of microdosing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I work with a lot of psychedelic facilitators and integration coaches, and quite a few of them, even if their, main service is a macro dose, a larger dose of psilocybin, they oftentimes are working with their clients in some sort of protocol afterwards with microdosing to your point, like to really help them integrate the experiences and see a longer impact of that original macro dose. So yeah, there's a really beautiful way to weave all of these plants together, and I think
Yeah.
integration is a really huge piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so important. And you got to keep that alive, be on the path, be on your path, not
Yeah.
look at it like a magic bullet or a one-time fix,
Hmm.
but as a new way of being in the world. That's the approach that I'd like to take.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Here, I'm going to share one more study because I think it's amazing. We're going to look at giving psilocybin to people who want to quit smoking cigarettes. And this is a big trial, and it had incredible results. So, people stopping smoking was 80% of the participants after 6 months. And that's just a much higher rate than any other approach to working with an addiction, especially like one as strong as cigarettes. So, I
Hmm.
just wanted to share that to folks that is
Hmm.
an example of a science study showing real world impacts, potentially saving the lives, adding years or decades onto the lives of those people who quit smoking cigarettes. That's incredible. So there is amazing science out there showing the benefits of psilocybin. Yeah.
There really is. There's also, in the different companies that I worked at over the years, part of what it looks like to be on the inside of their companies is being on the inside of the client wins. Because all of our facilitators or guides will be prompted to share like what wins are your clients having to keep, us really um, just immersed in the work and the goodness that we're doing. And what I was really shocked by, this was with ketamine specifically, but I think it goes across the board, especially with psilocybin as well, is you see just spontaneous alcohol. I think there's probably a term for it, but just people completely walking away from alcohol usage where it at one point was maybe, a little bit of a dependency all the way to completely not interacting with that substance ever again. And that not even being part of the intention for working with psychedelics. But you really see when people are addressing deep traumas, the coping mechanisms and the things that they're using to be able to cope and deal with that original trauma. When you unearth a trauma and, give it some space, give it some air, the coping mechanisms aren't needed anymore. And people really naturally fall away from alcohol usage. That was a really common yet surprising one that came up for us.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. I think part of what a good psychedelic experience, the right set and setting, obviously you don't want to do it too often. We want to be intelligent and smart about it, but I think these medicines help us be more in our body, help us really notice what is helping us be healthy and feel good naturally and what's not. And I think that's part of that. And there's a huge growing organization, addicts in, what is it called? I'm blanking on the name, but it's using psychedelic medicine with recovery.
Hmm.
And it's a lot of people are doing that. People have been in AA for years. They're still going to AA, which I think is great. And having some psychedelic experiences, the right sun setting again to help them move through their addiction. So
Yeah,
it's a huge, huge thing. Yeah.
super important. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing I was going to ask you about that you mentioned before we started recording was this distinction between, how do I say it, above ground work and underground work. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a hot topic in my world right now. So part of why this is so just top of mind is, I got my start in the, above ground, or probably a better term for this audience would be just the regulated space, working with ketamine or working with psilocybin in right now, Oregon and Colorado are the two places you can get legal psilocybin therapy. And at the time, about 18 months ago, I got hired to co-create a community for the company Tricycle Day, which is a pretty big newsletter in the psychedelic space. And the founder saw a really big gap in the industry and a really big need where psychedelic facilitators didn't have a lot of business support because it's such a unique offering amongst many other things. And we co-created this community for psychedelic facilitators, and I've been working with them on a weekly basis, at least one call a week since last January. And we were always serving the full spectrum, above ground, below ground. Some people have their feet in both doors, like they're just it's a pretty diverse group. And back in this January, Tricycle Day actually got acquired by the company Althea. And Althea only serves the regulated space, which as of right now, they only serve Colorado and Oregon licensed psilocybin facilitators. And the goal was to take that community eventually under that umbrella as well. And after a few months of trying to exist in that place and still be the community director and still be the face of this community, it just wasn't feeling aligned because I realized during this experience that I have such a big bleeding heart for the unregulated space. And there's a number of factors there that really bring me towards this space. And it really depends on everyone's comfort level. For me, I appreciate the fact that underground unregulated facilitators can work with a number of medicines. As of right now, only ketamine and only psilocybin in very unique settings are available in a legal format, and there's just so much work that can be done with the variety of other medicines that are out there that we've been using as humans for, a millennia, but we just don't legally have access to them right now. So I really appreciate the frontliners that are putting it all on the line to make these medicines accessible. They've often saved their own lives with these medicines and are now being called forward to be able to provide those medicines as well. And I really appreciate the way that they operate in this space and the work that they do. I mentioned earlier, I think it's
Mm.
such a noble cause. And I also believe they have, they're up against a lot. They're up against the law. They're up against their own, imposter syndrome because there is no, regulated space telling them that they're a yes or a no and can do this medicine. Like it's just, to your point earlier, it's the wild, wild west. So I
Mm.
really appreciate serving this community because there's more medicines involved, and oftentimes accessibility from a financial standpoint, you're just seeing more diversity in the unregulated space. Whereas, especially with psilocybin in Colorado and Oregon, by the time you pay the service centers, pay the facilitators, pay for the medicine, pay like it is such a steep expense for one single journey, and the price point is completely different in the unregulated space, dependent on who your
Mm.
facilitator is. And I really love supporting those that are just working on sliding scale and just doing the most to make their work accessible, whether it's group settings or what have you. And, the other thing I really appreciate about the unregulated spaces, the ability to really weave in your individual philosophies and belief systems and modalities and just whatever is alive for you. You set the entire container from the incense that's burning to the music that's playing
Mm.
to every person that's part of the journey. You're really thinking through, okay, if we have these seven journeyers, which facilitators are the right mix of genders and diverse backgrounds and, interesting stories, and just really being intentional about creating the entire experience.
Mm.
And that you're not seeing that in the regulated space, maybe in a few of the psilocybin ceremonies, but not ones that I've heard about.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspectives on that. It's a big
Yeah.
discussion.
Hmm.
Um, I can see pros and cons for both, and um, I would, yeah, not sure what to say about it right now, but it's good to put it out there. I mean, there's clearly a difference there, and it's worth, for
Yeah.
people to consider for themselves. I mean, if someone's listening to this and wants to
Hmm.
find a facilitator, a guide, I think it's really good to do research, ask a lot of questions, take your time, and because the shadow side of the unregulated space is perhaps more potential for bad actors, and that's shadow side that's worth speaking to. I mean, that being said, there could be bad actors in the regulated space too. Like we just talked
Yeah.
about ketamine clinics that are doing everything legally, but maybe not really providing the best healing space for people. And so, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
You're spot on. The unregulated space is, yeah, just as treacherous for different reasons because no one's holding anyone to a standard. No one's checking in on people. Are you qualified to do this work? What kind of work are you doing? Are you getting, impactful results? There's a lot of, guru energy hiding in the unregulated space, which is tough because we're only going to see more of that in the coming years. And my biggest recommendation to anybody is really learn how to use discernment. If you get a bad vibe from somebody, if their interactions feel off, if their communications don't feel aligned with you, I would really trust that. Our bodies really keep the score, and they're also telling us when something might be amiss. So I would definitely recommend using discernment when thinking about working with any facilitators, regulated or unregulated, because yeah, not just because they're in the regulated space does not mean that they're doing work with integrity. There's just as much nuance in the above ground space as well.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's worth talking about all this and putting the information out there for people. And, um, you know, I think there's an expression I like, which is it's not about being perfect, but it is about making progress. And so if you work with someone or with the group and there might be some things you like and appreciate, there might be some things that you don't, doesn't mean there's not value in that experience for you. Obviously, if some lines are crossed, it's not good, right? There's clear lines, when we talk about sexual abuse or financial manipulation, or, for
Yeah.
example, I heard about someone who was doing medicine work and then some of the people they were working with were reporting that at the end of the experience, they were basically trying to sell them on something or course or that's to me that's a line that's unethical because
Yeah.
someone's been opened they're you should be there for their own healing. You shouldn't be there to try to sell them something extra at the end. That's a clear ethical guideline for me. But there's a lot of ethics, in this space, and that's a
Yeah.
whole separate gigantic conversation. But it's worth naming and thinking about for sure.
Yeah. You're right. I've actually heard, unfortunately, of a similar experience. I'm curious if it's the same person or organization. But yeah, in a post journey come down, yeah, using that as an opportunity to pitch some sort of deeper work with the facilitator. And that to me is just a red line, hard no, in my world as well. And yeah, to your point around ethics and that being such a just important conversation in this space, and again, especially in the unregulated space, who's holding anybody to a certain standard, it's really hard to judge. Um, the community, so the end of that story, me not feeling as aligned with the community once it went under the regulated umbrella, I wound up putting my notice in because I wanted to do my own thing, and I really felt called to build a community specifically for the unregulated space. All would be welcome, but I was really looking to support those that didn't have as many viable opportunities for connection because they were so underground. And long story short, the company Althea wound up allowing me to completely take over the community. So I now own the community that I started building about 18 months ago, and it's now called
Amazing.
the Expansion Community.
Hmm.
And yeah, we have a lot of really powerful conversations. We had Kylia Taylor, if you're familiar with the author, and a really big voice in the ethics space. She came in and taught a workshop all around dual relationships with psychedelics. And that was an important conversation that I had not considered, just even, me talking to my mom about psychedelics and how I have a dual relationship with her if I'm trying to educate her about psychedelics, but I'm also her daughter. So
Hmm.
it was a really impactful workshop that we did together. So if people are interested, we do have the recording in our library. And I offer a free trial. So if anyone's looking to, yeah, just binge some of the content in the library, we have really good people in the space teaching amazing conversations.
Yeah, that's great. It's really community is so important. It's one of the things we're going to discuss together, and I think especially for the unregulated space, it's really important to have people you can talk to and get advice from and support from and feel connected with and not feel isolated and like you have to do everything on your own. And that's a danger just with this field in general,
Yeah.
working with people, coaching, therapy, mental health. I'm self-employed, so I have to make an effort to reach out, to have supervisors, colleagues, people I can talk to, groups I can join. Yeah, I think listening to podcasts is a great resource because we're inviting people into a more shared conversation, and it's more real and alive, and you can hear other people's challenges and struggles, and it's not just you. If you're feeling something, there's probably other people feeling it. So it's really important.
Absolutely. That's a great point too, as a, yeah, solopreneur, solo practitioner, to have the check-ins from a mental standpoint, from an ethical and an integrity standpoint. I think that's really paramount. And one of the questions that we often say in our community is who's healing the healers, who's holding space for the space holders. So we've been really intentional. We've had two integration circles every month for our community, and we're adding in a peer consultation conversation every month as well to give our facilitators, our members, an opportunity to process difficult journeys for them as the space holder. Like there are people that go into
Mhm.
psychosis. There are people that have really, aggressive or angry interactions with the medicine, and it can be traumatizing for the facilitators no matter how trauma informed they are. You never quite know what's going to happen within a medicine space, so giving them a place to talk it out with other people that probably understand very, very significantly what that experience is like, is really helpful for this community, especially to have that place to go and air their grievances and process the wild things that happen in the wild, wild west.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree. Well, it's been really great to have you on the podcast. Anything else you wanted to share with us or go into in the time we have?
I don't think so. I think I covered, yeah, everything. Oh, actually, we did want to talk about the workshop that I just had in the community
Oh,
today.
yeah.
We had Steph K, Jennifer Zuckerman, and Chelsea Coyle of the Galilea team. They are creating this incredible research-backed company, education and research-backed company that's really committed to educating facilitators on the importance of women's hormonal health and psychedelics. So, thinking about where a woman's at in her 28-day cycle, where she's at postpartum, perimenopause, like really thinking through the entire life cycle of a woman's hormones. And yeah, they just walked us through a beautiful 90-minute conversation around how to really implement all of this information and education into a private practice, a psychedelic practice, so people feel really supported in the process of where are you at in your cycle? Okay, here's what's happening with your estrogen this week. It's going to impact you with this particular medicine in this way. And just really thinking about the way that our bodies are going to interact with this medicine in such a unique way, dependent on each of these cycles and each of these
Mm.
um, hormonal things to consider. And yeah, that conversation was really good. And it's not something that I've heard about. I know that we should be studying women's bodies, especially when it comes to psychedelics, but this is the first conversation I've heard in this space. And the information is it's really staggering because it's so profoundly different depending on what's happening hormonally in a body. You can have a completely different experience with these different medicines, and it's really influenced me to think about, yeah, how I journey and how I talk to others about journey as well. So yeah, very, very
Mm.
important conversation. To me, it feels very cutting edge because I haven't heard this much. And it's with three very beautiful voices in this space. And yeah, I just was really happy to have that conversation and have it recorded in our library as well for people to
Nice.
continue to just dip into that pool. So yeah, that was an impactful one.
Yeah, that's a great topic to share and to think about. And I think being more in touch with your body, your cycles, where you're at, what's going on in the different levels, all of that will potentially be amplified in any kind of psychedelic experience.
Yep.
And not to say better or worse, but just amplified, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's what psychedelics do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great. It's been wonderful to have you on. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll provide some links below so people can find you and learn more about you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This is a great conversation. Yeah, really appreciate the work you're doing in the world.